I once heard someone describe the process of scientific discovery in a way that I really liked. It went something like this. Imagine a circle that contains all human knowledge. From a distance, the edge of this circle appears smooth, but if you zoom in and look real close, you can see that there are these small bumps jutting out from the surface that collectively push the edge outward. Each one of those bumps is the result of someone asking a question that had never been asked before, a question that's novel, even if it's novel in the smallest of ways, and then answering it. I think this could be a fantastic way to describe art as well. We can imagine the circle as encompassing all human artistic achievement, and the bumps on the edges represent the creation of works that are new and novel, again, even if they're novel in small ways. I like this description because it emphasizes that scientific progress is mostly made in small, incremental steps that build on top of each other over time. When we hear about big breakthroughs, they can often seem a lot bigger than they really are because the incremental steps that led up to that point weren't as widely publicized. Similarly, it seems to me like in a lot of cases, the only difference between a work of art that is praised as groundbreaking and revolutionary and a work that's labeled as derivative is just that one of these works has more obscure influences than the other. Legend of the Guardians is an example of the latter type of work. As far as influences go, the monomyth, or the story of the hero's journey, is the least obscure you could possibly get. But to dismiss Legend of the Guardians as just another monomyth is, I think, a mistake, because it's also one of the best examples I know of this kind of incremental approach to novelty, starting with ideas we're all familiar with, and taking a single, very specific step forward. To find out what that step is, we have to find the thematic core of the movie. To do so, a good rule of thumb, for any story really, is to look at how it begins and how it ends. Legend of the Guardians opens with our young hero-to-be Soren listening to his father tell a story. The film ends with Soren, having now completed an adventure of his own, telling the story of that adventure to a younger generation of owls. From these two scenes alone, we would probably guess that Legend of the Guardians is a movie about storytelling, and that is exactly what it is. It's a monomyth where each of the recurring monomyth elements are framed in terms of stories and storytelling. For example, let's look at the mirror image character. This is a character that often shows up in monomyths as an equal and opposing force to the protagonist. It's often a close friend or relative who betrays the hero after adopting opposite ideals. In Legend of the Guardians, this character is Soren's brother, Clud, and the difference between the two is established immediately. While Soren is enraptured by his father's tale of a historic battle between the noble guardians of Ga'Hoole and the evil Pure Ones, Clud has no interest in the story and insists that none of it ever happened. This is the fundamental difference between the two characters. While Soren earnestly believes in the stories and draws inspiration from them, Clud cannot bring himself to find value in them, and seems incapable of imagining a world in which they are real.
Look, you have a soft head, Soren. I think Da has filled it with stories and dreams.
There's nothing wrong with dreams.
Well, that's the difference between us, brother. I have mine when I'm asleep.
The next day, the young owls get a flying lesson, and Soren, though just a beginner, already displays more aptitude than his older brother. Trying to help Clud, Soren explains that before he takes off, he imagines himself flying and pictures the spot where he's going to land. As we've already learned though, Clud lacks an imagination, so this advice doesn't seem to help him any. The brothers are soon captured by the forces of the Pure Ones, and Soren makes an attempt to escape in order to find the Guardians and alert them of the Pure Ones' return. Clud's betrayal of Soren is cemented when, despite having the opportunity to flee with Soren, he instead chooses to stay and become a soldier in the Pure One's army. This is the culmination of the character's opposing natures. Soren displays once again his ability to imagine a world and a future beyond his present circumstances. He is not sure he will even be able to escape with his life, let alone find the Guardians, who are said to live in a distant and hidden land, but he can at the very least imagine himself doing so, in the same way that he could earlier visualize the branch he wanted to land upon. If conceiving a goal is the first step toward realizing it, Clud can't even make it that far. Just as during the flying lesson, His disdain for stories has rendered him incapable of thinking beyond the immediate, literal present. Had he joined Soren, he could have become a legendary hero, the subject of stories for generations to come. But we're led to believe that the possibility never even entered his head, nor the possibility that he could face a downfall if he stayed with the Pure Ones. All Cludd knows is that he has found a place where he feels appreciated in the moment, and apparently that is enough for him. During the climactic duel between Soren and Cludd, we're given one last reminder of the brothers' conflicting ideals.
You're just weak, Soren. Still living in your dreams.
No, my dreams are what make me strong, Cludd. They led me to the Guardians.
In the process of fighting, the two take a tumble, and Soren manages to grab a branch while Cludd hangs on to him. This is a scene we've seen in many movies, even the part where Cludd appeals to Soren's sympathy in order to save himself and gain the upper hand. But of all the times I've seen this scenario play out, I feel it's the most justified, and most well realized, in Legend of the Guardians, specifically because of the contrast between the two characters. Cludd knows that Soren is a dreamer, and that his strength comes from his dreams and his optimism. At the final decisive moment, Cludd attempts to use this strength against Soren and turn it into a weakness. A prophecy, or consultation with an oracle, is another staple of monomyth stories. The oracle in Legend of the Guardians is this echidna who insists that everything is foretold, but he never actually tells the group anything about themselves that they haven't told him first.
If you really know all, then how come you don't know that?
It was foretold there would be one who doubts.
After the group hesitates to follow his directions to the Tree of Hulamir, he encourages them by telling them a prophecy, but it's implied that he's just kind of making it up on the spot. It comes across as more of a cold reading than an actual prophecy, but it serves its purpose, and leading Soren and the others to believe they're destined to reach the tree, as if they were in some kind of heroic story, helps to encourage them to set off on the dangerous journey. Another recurring monomyth element that makes an appearance is the revelation, which fuels the protagonist's transformation into a hero. Soren's revelation comes when, after finding the Guardians, he comes across an account of the battle from his dad's stories, an account that paints a much different picture of what happened.
Honestly, it's not at all like my dad told it.
No. How did he tell it?
Well, Dad always made it seem so heroic. You know, like a great victory. Well, in these chronicles, I mean, the battle just sounds like...
Like hell.
Soren also learns that the author of this account, and the hero of the story, is none other than Easelrib, the eccentric old guardian who had been mentoring him. Easelrib doesn't quite meet Soren's expectations, but in fairness, Soren's expectations weren't grounded in reality to begin with.
Because Lies of Kiel was my hero.
Yes, well, fancy it must be hard meeting your hero and seeing that he's real and not a myth.
And this is the lesson that Soren must learn, his revelation, that stories are by their nature exaggerations and distortions of reality. By extension, Soren's idea of what a hero should be is also distorted. As Easelrib tells Soren, heroes only seek to do what is right. Sometimes that brings them to battle, but battle itself is necessary rather than glorious. Almost immediately after this conversation, the Guardians are called to battle against the Pure Ones, and Soren faces a choice. Like many monomyth protagonists, he must choose to either accept the revelation or reject it. In this case, rejecting the revelation would involve heading off to battle in an attempt to act out the literal events of the stories he's been told. Accepting the revelation would mean staying behind to care for his sister, who has been placed in a trance by the Pure Ones. It means accepting that the most heroic course of action is the one that leads to the most good, even if it's not the one that makes the best story.
Here. Come along. We could use the talon fodder. I'd love to throw some bodies at the enemy.
Yeah, but
Or you could stay here, tend to your sister, and do some real good.
Soren chooses to accept the revelation and stays behind. In doing so, he completes his transformation into a real hero. Eglantine awakes from her trance and tells Soren of Cludd's betrayal, and Soren realizes that the Guardians are heading into a trap. Had he rejected the revelation, he would have shared their fate, dooming them all in the process. Instead, he becomes their savior. Because he accepted the revelation and completed his transformation, Soren is now ready to join the battle, and upon learning that he is the only one who can save the Guardians, saving them now becomes the most heroic course of action. Even after his revelation, and after he's experienced real battle, Soren closes out the movie by telling a story that seems just as fluffy as the one he was told as a kid. This might seem strange, but it's perfectly in line with the movie's stance toward heroic stories. Sure, Soren needed a bit of a reality check, and it's important not to confuse stories for literal truth. But the fact is, Soren would have never even made it to the Guardians without the dreams instilled in him by these stories. And even during the final battle, Soren saves the day not through his combat prowess, but through his ability to make plans and carry them out. Ultimately, it all really comes back around to that first flying lesson. Thus, the movie's stance on these stories is quite clear. They instill the ability to dream, the ability to imagine something and then turn it into reality.
The stories, they're real.
You made them real, Soren.
Soren understands this, and by the end of the movie he's ready to help pass on the storytelling tradition to a new generation of owlets. We can even see signs of this theme in the title. The book series on which this movie is based is called The Guardians of Ga'Hoole. The movie changes this to Legend of the Guardians, thus switching the subject from Guardians to Legend. Which is fitting, because the Guardians don't even really do anything. It's their legend, their legacy, that is the center of the movie. One really cool thing about this movie is that since it's a heroic story, much like the one Soren is telling, in a way it's also advocating for itself. Zack Snyder and the rest of the crew, like Soren, are doing their part in passing on these stories to a new generation. Some might say, we already have so many monomyth stories, do we really need another? But lucky for us, Soren's father already has an answer to that question.
Stories are part of our culture and our history. We learn from them.
Even after the 700th time we hear them?
Yes, even then.
Going back to the science comparison I made at the start of the video, another reason I like it is because in science you've got constants and you've got variables. In Legend of the Guardians, by holding the monomyth formula constant, it allows the things that are done differently to stand out that much more. This helps convey the movie's theme more effectively, and produces a result that's novel and feels like the next logical step of the ideas it starts from. It's the perfect example of the bump in the surface that, with the help of many others over time, pushes the frontier of artistic accomplishment ever outward.